Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the IQ Accountant Live webinar, A Path to Data and Analytics in ERP. We're super excited to present this webinar to you. We've done this for a few times now, and we're very excited about the response we're getting. We hope it's informative to you. Today's agenda is going to cover first current state, the ERP operational data silos. We'll continue to future state, integrated data models, and then circle back to the challenge to transform ERP data. And I'll talk more about that later on in the webinar. And last, we'll finish up with a Q&A session. So with that, just a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Noel Pagany. I'll be your host today. My email and phone number is available here. And I'm also going to share this presentation to everyone that's attending this webinar. So no need to take notes. A little bit about IQ Accountant. We have many years of ERP financials and supply chain experience. So with that and all our accounting solutions that we've completed for Fortune 1000 companies, we were in a unique position to develop what we call the REACTR platform. That's a resource activity tracker. And we really built this after developing stopgap static cash flow statements from a few of our customers. And then we stopped and really asked our question, can we make cash flow process more integrated with operational data and more actionable data for decision makers? So we'll talk about that as well in this webinar. This webinar is really ERP platform agnostic. So we're not talking about any one particular ERP. This can really be applied in multiple environments. So we encourage you to ask questions about whatever platform you're in, and we'll be more than happy to try to assist any way we can. So with that, I'd like to just start with why are we talking about data and analytics in ERP? Well, what's important in ERP is in today's world is there's been a lot of expectations what ERP can do. And unfortunately, the reality doesn't meet the expectations. So there's opportunities there to increase ROI in ERP using the data that's available. These improvements in measurements will help internal decision makers have more actionable data and make better data-driven decisions as we get more into this data age. Some of the opportunities that we are interested in that we think would be really beneficial for our clients is one, an integrated operational and financial data. You'll hear me talk about this throughout the webinar because that's really what the cash flow diagnostics that we built is really based on. That's moving away from just general ledger financial amounts and incorporating operational data with cash flow activity so the internal decision makers can see a full 360 of what's going on with their cash, diagnose any problems, and communicate to any departments or managers that need information about cash flow activity. Other opportunities to automate manual reports to decrease non-value added work, right? So we move away from the manual work and move toward analytics, business partnerships, and things that will actually increase value in the organization. We also look at improvements in measurement and or accuracy of reporting data, right? If it's important enough for the organization, then you should be able to measure it. If you can measure it, you can manage it. In addition, you can also improve the accuracy of reporting data with better data and analytics. So that's a key improvement for ROI. The other thing that you can look at is analyzing variances on demand and provide timely business reasons to decision makers. In addition, you can improve your accounting allocation process, right? Change indirect costs from allocation to actual activity base. So you can see exactly where the costs are originating from based on activity and not allocation. So we're getting more closer to the activity. So we're getting better measurements, better data accuracy, kind of goes back to that. In addition, you can build data models for managerial accounting support. Managerial accounting is a counterbalance to GAAP reporting or financial statement reporting. This looks at the internal business more based on a long-term sustainability of the organization. Cash flows are very important for managerial accounting. And it also encompasses revenue, not only cost, revenue and cost are equally important to measure and forecast. So those are some of the opportunities we see. And that's why we're kind of having this discussion this morning, is to really reflect upon the opportunities in ERP and what we can do with that data. So let's talk about current state a little bit. So ERP today have what we call operational data silos. And we drew up this Venn diagram to kind of reflect that. So if your ERP data is your point of truth, you'll see that within it is these circles in Venn diagram 1 over here. There's these circles that are the modules, right? And these are operational islands where you have the different modules and really they're not integrated with each other. And then in the circle number 2, you have these reporting tools that kind of rely on this data within circle 1, but how does it get access to the data? How does it integrate that data, right, between the different islands? And that's really the intersection, what we call reporting data. So you can use Ledger, you can use SQL, use user queries. Now, the key here is general ledger is financial data only. And the integration of the data requires technical and functional skills. And what we've seen is users generally default to manual spreadsheets, which is off system. It's it's not within the purview of an on-system process that can be replicated. So there's some risk there as well. So what has happened in the last few years is companies have realized this and they've started developing a different systems to support the integration of data and more in-depth data analysis. So one of the solutions has been implementing an EPM system, enterprise performance management system, to manage that data and integrate it, right? But these EPM systems don't contain all that valuable information, and sometimes they're not real time. So sometimes it might make sense to incorporate that data in your ERP and have it available in one place, especially to support financial close. So those are some of the considerations when you're looking at ERP data. The operational data is separated from each other and need to be integrated. The financial amounts are generally what's used, but they don't really have an in-depth perspective because they're not integrated into the operational process of the ERP. Customers generally, what they do is they do off-system processes to support more of that in-depth data, or they move to an EPM system. But again, EPM systems generally might not have everything you need. And we're going to go into our cash flow diagnostic solution, which is a solution we've developed for using ERP data that really readily is not available in EPM systems. So we'll talk about that as well. So the effects of ERP data silos in let me make sure we're sharing here. 1 second. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. So what happens in as a result of these data silos is we see reporting in terms of job hierarchy. So if you look at this nice graph here, you see job hierarchy on the y-axis. You see analysts are more close to the transaction data, and they can produce reports and push them up to senior manager. The impact of that is there could be a delay across the financial period of when those reports are available to senior manager. After close, you see that there is a compressed amount of work over a very short amount of time to produce compliance reports. That focus on external customers and internal decision makers are kind of left out of the dark because there's the focus. So what we'd like to do is improve this process in ERP and make the data more readily available. So if we're able to provide on-demand data and analytics, then the process would work more like we're showing in this picture, where we have a constant real-time transaction data in the middle there. And then we have is an integrated data layer between operational and financial that's available across the financial period. So anytime during the period, you'll have this data that's available to metrics, analytics, reporting, and it's not based on job hierarchy, but on job function. So if senior managers and analysts need that data, they should be able to access it when they need, right? And so this is what we'd like to move to in future state as a result of data analytics accessibility on demand. So what is our path to data analytics in ERP? Well, we put this picture together to kind of represent how we went about that process. So let me kind of explain that. So on the bottom, we have this ERP transaction layer. And I think if you worked in ERP, you'll know that there's a lot of tables here. And if you're building queries or SQL, it can get kind of messy with the table joins and some of the technical perspective of that layer. What we did was build a layer on top of that, what we call the resource activity tracker. And what that produces is a simplified and integrated data models to represent the on-demand data that the managers or internal decision makers need in the organization. So data models incorporate the resources like cash agents that transact by using that resource. There's events that occur, and that might be purchasing supplies or billing customers that we want to track within our data model. We have then the accounting that supports all these events, as well as the metadata that helps us understand the significance from a higher level, right, of where that information is based in. So all of that in our data model lends itself to on-demand data and analytics with some transactional transparency, which is very important because then we can kind of identify where in the process that we might need to look deeper, who is involved in that transaction. And so some of the things that we can solve for this is obviously the cash flow, which we'll get into more later in the webinar, but also profitability, risk, compliance, and other metrics that are important to the business. Now, I do want to reiterate some of these data points are available in EPM. So you can get a solution that's really out of the box in EPM, but that won't necessarily cover everything the business might need to manage for internal decision makers. So think about that. Think about EPM, think about ERP data, what's available in EPM, and all the data that's available in ERP, and kind of think of it that in those terms. So the path to data analytics in ERP. So how do we go about building our cash flow diagnostics and reporting solution, right? Well, first you need to define the cash flow data model, right? What is this data model going to contain? What is it going to solve for? What are the questions it's going to answer? And I'll go into that in the next slide. Then there's the data capture stage where you identify the sources of cash flow data. And you want to make sure that's complete because you want an accurate picture of your cash flow activity. Then you'll move on to data profile stage where you understand all that transactional layer, that ERP transactional layer, to better guide you in the development or the engineering, which is the next stage, engineering of that data model, right? So this is actual build. Lastly, we have to make sure there's data quality, so we test and fix it. So the first one is define the cash flow data model. So in our cash flow data model, our first thing is we wanted to answer the what, why, and how questions for cash flow activity. And that was derived directly from operational and transactional perspective, right? We want to make sure that we open up that operational data for the decision maker. So we're integrating across those data silos, and we're also having transactional transparency. We wanted to have that integrated data that, like you mentioned above, and that would contain vendor and customer payments, employee expenses, contracts, and any third-party cash activity. So treasury revenue systems might be also be incorporated. Again, we want an integrated data model. The data model should be multi-currency, multi-ledger financial amounts. So we want to make sure we're flexible in that perspective from our financial amounts. So now we talked about operational, this kind of impacts the financial general ledger perspective. The data model must contain operational data for resource activity, event, and internal and external agent. And we kind of talked about that in our diagram that our data model, the keys around that is the resource activity, so the cash flow activity, the events like billing and purchasing of supplies, etc., and also the internal agents that are transacting. So their response, we can kind of go to them to kind of ask more questions. And then there'll be external agents like the vendors and customers. So that's going to be very important. Lastly, this data model should support compliance reporting. So we should be able to produce a cash flow statement from our data model. Okay, data capture stages. What are the sources of cash flow data? So here we specify the ERP module that contained cash flow data. So this is important because now we're getting into kind of more of the details of how this data model is going to be produced from our ERP system, right? So we can identify accounts receivable, accounts payable, billing, customer contracts. So all those modules will play a key role in producing this cash flow data model. We'll also have to identify external systems, right? Because since we want an accurate picture of our cash flow, we're going to identify any external system that has cash flow data. And when I see external system, that could be, in a travel and expense system that's SaaS-based that we want to make sure we have incorporated into our data model. Could be a revenue system where we actually are getting revenue from an external third-party system. They want to make sure we track how much revenue is coming in from those third-party systems. And we have to ask ourselves, how will we integrate this third-party data? Is it already incorporated into the ERP via GL, or is it possibly need to be integrated? So obviously, there's a lot of tools in ERP to integrate data. One of the solutions that we have suggested to our clients is integrate into general ledger. Obviously, if you choose to do it in ERP, build the model, you could do it that way. But there's also, if you choose to build it in EPM, there's tools to integrate as well. or in BI tools as well. So there's a lot of options there, but the key is to really identify those, in this stage, identify those sources, and based on the platform, you're going to build this data model and the solution, you're going to need to figure out how you want to integrate it. The data profile stage, understand the ERP data layer, right? So identify important data fields and their related table hierarchy, right? So if you're working with in legacy ERP system, there'll be a relational database. You want to make sure you identify those fields, identify the hierarchy. If you're working in an EPM system, you're going to need to understand what is available now, what is available, and what additional data you need to incorporate into the EPM system. Then you have to understand how often is the data refreshed or posted to the tables, right? So this will kind of determine how often the users will be available, will have availability to the most up-to-date data, right? And this might also direct the decision whether you build a solution connected to your ERP or use the EPM. If you need more real-time on-demand information, possibly the EPR platform might work better, or something more close to that data in the ERP. If that data is not as time sensitive and the users can see it more on a less periodic basis, then potentially an EPM platform or BI solution might work just as well. How often will data refresh in the data model, right? Okay, kind of goes back to the decision of how often, based on the prior point, is your data model going to be refreshed? So that's a consideration. It kind of falls from the other point. And the other important thing to consider is what data will be summarized, right? So we want to simplify this data model. In our cash flow process, we want to simplify as much as possible. So we summarized quite a bit of information. But there was also information that we needed to keep, so we can also connect back to the transaction layer. So that was really important. Obviously, the more detail you have, the more rows you will have in your data model. So just keep that in mind, and that also will kind of impact where the data will be housed. Will it be in a data warehouse, and things like that. So something to keep in mind there. The next stage is the data engineering stage, right? So we build the data model. So here we just want to emphasize SQL skills are key. When we build our cash flow data model, it's mostly SQL and more SQL, right? So that data model is based on SQL. I can't really repeat that enough. You will need advanced SQL skills. And especially if you would like to simplify how that data is grouped together and summarized, and also simplifies the process too, because then you reduce the number of steps to complete that data model in terms of loading it. And then there's also that process of checking for integrity, quality, and completeness of the data sets. So you don't, so you verify the data set to not contain duplicates, blanks, missing rows, etc. So there's a lot of work there to make sure that it is working to your specifications. And then lastly, we finish to the data quality stage, and that's going to be testing and fixing it, right? And this is really when you pull in sorry, one second. This is when we have a recursive process, or you include the functional team to help you test the data. They're going to give you great insights. This is also a recursive process where you'll be testing, profiling, data engineering, and retesting. You might change aspects of the functionality. When we talked about summarizing the data, you might not be able to summarize based on the feedback you got from the testing from the functional team. You might incorporate more detail in the data set or data model. So just keep that in mind. And then get a formal sign off from the functional team that, right, your data model looks to be accurate, and they can keep on continue. Okay, connect analytics to the data model, right? So finally we have this data model, we've got sign off. What is our next step? Okay, so now we need to we've made a decision, right? We're going to either do our development in ERP using those tools, or we can decide to use a BI platform or EPM platform. And now here's the fun part. We can actually start developing stuff using this data model. So what is available, right? Visualizations, dashboards, drill down functionality should be incorporated with this data model. Automate the cash flow statement and other reports so we can take the users away from manual effort and move them to more value-added work with business partnerships and analytics. The data model can feed artificial intelligence and machine learning analytics, and which would be the next step. But obviously you've got the data for this, these new ways of looking at the data. So just definitely be incorporated in that plan. And then you should also have a continuous feedback from customers and build back better, right? This is a continuous process of improvement. So that kind of wraps up my presentation today. I hope you got a lot out of it. Again, I will be sharing this presentation with attendees, but here's my email and phone number. Please visit iqaccountant.com for more white papers, webinars, explainer videos, request demo, REACTR platform. And please follow us on LinkedIn. We share often information about cash flow diagnostics and reporting. We think it's going to fill that gap between expectations and reality of ERP. So with that, I'm going to go to question Q&A. So I have a question from, so we have a lot of Excel sheets that we manage in transactions. It's very important to us. How does our platform help maintain the data? How are you to implement it? Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, they've got a lot of Excel sheets that they use the off-system reporting, right? And so the way we would move away from that is, first we would understand what is the key information or question you're trying to answer with your spreadsheet process. After having defined that, then we would go through the stages of creating that data model, right? And then using that data model, build an analytics platform where you can, get your visualizations, you can get your reporting, you can get metrics on demand. So that would be the key to move things on camera in that process. So great question. Thank you for answering that. That, I think that's all the questions I have here. If you have any questions after this presentation, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. Be more than happy to help. So anyway, thank you again and have a great rest of your day.